Just a friendly reminder to members joining, if they could accept the prompt to be promoted, that'd be appreciated. Maybe a quick note before I start, Chair. Quorum is 6, and we might be fairly close to that, so it would be appreciated if members could stay online for the duration of the meeting, and we'll keep an eye out for quorum, making sure the quorum is in attendance as well.
Okay, thank you. If we're all set to go, I'll just give it another minute and then we'll begin if that's. Okay, it is 5:32, so I think we'll get going. Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening's Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Please note, I should note that this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and the meeting recording will also be uploaded to the city's agendas and minutes portal after the meeting. I have received a few regrets from members, Jason Wang, Jocelyn Roberts, Vice Chair Colin White, and I believe Francois Rivet may be a little bit late in joining, but hopefully he'll be able to join us. Just before we get started, I'm going to ask the committee coordinator to call the roll, and members who are here in Zoom, which is everybody, could you just unmute yourselves briefly when your name is called?
Member Ball.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry
Thank
that,
you.
I'm here.
Member Burgraff.
Present.
Member Huang. Member Karakassis. I see you online. Member Lenk.
Here.
Thank you. Member Lashman.
Hello, present.
Thank you. Member Nerudin. Member Rivet. Member Robert. Member Sun. Thank
I'm
you.
here.
Member or Vice Chair White and Chair Mackenzie. And I don't believe Counselor Leeper.
Oh, okay, terrific. Okay, so we have quorum and so we'll keep moving along. Are there any declarations for this meeting tonight? Okay, hearing none, we'll move along to confirmation of minutes. So the minutes confirmed from the last meeting, which was February 27th, 2025. Thank you, Jason, for seconding. Just a quick raise of hands, yes? Okay, we'll confirm those. Thank you very much. And the next item, sort of housekeeping business, is election of chair and vice chair, and that's through to the end of this term of council. I'm going to actually ask the committee coordinator to walk us through the election process for the chair and vice chair positions. And again, these are for the remainder of this term of council, which is through to the end of 2026. So Eric, please, if you could walk us through that.
Thank you, Chair. Not a problem. Essentially, the committee's elected chair and vice chair previously were in your hands in terms of how formal how formally the committee would like to proceed. I haven't received any expressions of interest from members in terms of who would seek to be nominated. But if there, for example, is only one interested member in each position, I could prepare a motion and screen share it to just to acclaim or appoint the members to those two positions. So that'd be fairly quick. That being said, if there's multiple candidates who wish to be considered, for example, we could proceed with a more formal step-by-step process, including nominations, and then eventually a vote and an election of those members. So it's up to committee how they wish to proceed, and perhaps a logical place to start would be to see if any members are interested in either position. Also, I should probably note, I did confirm with the vice chair that he was not able to continue on as vice chair for the remainder of the term, although he will be continuing as a member. So there is at least one vacancy to be filled.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how would people how would the members like to proceed in that case? I'm sort of anticipating that we can do this fairly informally. And so if there's any nominations to be made, please maybe just a raise of hands and we can do this informally. I will say that I'm happy to continue in this role, yeah, but I'm also happy to step aside if if there are others that are interested in taking this on for the rest of the term.
Caroline, I would love to see you continue if you're willing to do so.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other volunteers? Okay, so Eric, that I'll perhaps let you do any formalities required for the chair position. But do we have a volunteer, because we do need a vice chair? Any volunteers / victims for vice chair?
And if it's helpful, Chair, it should not represent a significant additional workload. Practically speaking, the chair is our point of contact for most committee business, and the vice chair would really only be required to step in the case of your absence during a meeting, and there's only 2 or 3 meetings remaining for the current term of council, so it shouldn't be too much of a commitment. But though it would be helpful in the event that you are absent to have a vice chair available.
Sure. Anyone? Jason, would you like to join me in a vice chair role?
I have to admit, given my actual day job, I don't know that that's the most appropriate. I'm probably the least appropriate person on committee to do that. But but I gladly support anyone else.
Okay. Anyone else out there? Jonathan, you're in the middle of my 9 squares, so I'll go to you next.
I'm certainly pleased to help out, but I recognize I'm a new face and welcome anybody who knows the ropes better than I do.
Well,
there's no better way to learn, Jonathan.
No better way to, yeah, it's not a big load. That is for sure. So I'm happy to provide support as needed. But
okay, yeah, I'm sure I'm pleased to support in that role if it helps the committee.
Thank you very much. And
Perfect.
Chair, would there be a mover who would formally move the motion? Thank you very much, Member Burgraff. And if I could just have the indulgence of the committee for one brief moment. And the motion is on the screen. If the mover would be amenable to reading it.
Yes, whereas member Carolyn McKenzie has been nominated for the position of chair, and member Jonathan Loshman has been nominated for the position of vice chair, and both nominees have accepted their nominations. And whereas nominations have closed with no further nominations, therefore be it resolved that member Carolyn McKenzie is acclaimed to the position of chair, and member Jonathan Loshman is acclaimed to the position of vice chair for the remainder of the term.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that motion is carried, Chair.
Yes, it seemed all carried. Okay, terrific. We will move on. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jonathan. We will now move into the substantive item for the Planning Advisory Committee this evening, which is the update from staff on the new zoning bylaw. I'm going to obviously ask staff to provide an overview of this item, and after the slide presentation, members are going to have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and to provide any comments. And I see we have Carol Ruddy here this evening and Timothy Rowe from city staff who have been working extremely hard on this for years, I will say. And I also see that Marsha Wallace, our new planning chair from the city, has joined us, so which is terrific. Very happy to have you here, see you here this evening. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to Carol.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. I guess perhaps this is the third time I've presented to your committee, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight to talk to you about the final draft. It has been a long process, and we're finally there. So we'll just get on with the presentation. And I do look forward to answering questions at the end as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is the agenda for tonight for the presentation. We'll go over the project timelines. I'll give you the key messages for the draft zoning bylaw. We'll run over some of the changes in the final draft, and a summary of a public engagement to date, and just the next steps. Next slide, please. So our project timelines, the new zoning bylaw is coming out of the approval of the new official plan. When the official plan was approved and partway through its approvals process, there was direction given to staff to begin the process of working on a new zoning bylaw to implement the new official plan. And as you know, our new official plan is very different than the old one, and we need a new zoning bylaw to implement those new policies in that official plan. And we need a new zoning bylaw as well, really, to address what is a zoning bylaw that is carried forward zoning provisions from the 36 former zoning bylaws from the former municipalities in amalgamation, and it's over 60 years of accumulated zoning provisions. So when a zoning bylaw gets that large and complicated, it is necessary as a regulatory document to do these periodic checks of it, to bring it up to date with current standards and to try and simplify it. So that's been a big part of the work that we've been doing. So during 2023, we had pre-release consultations. We released discussion papers and had public open houses. We released draft 1 on May 31st, 2024. Draft 2 was released just a little bit less than a year later on March 20th. And so that's this year. There's been a lot of work done during that time. A lot of changes made to the bylaw. We released the final draft on September the 8th. We are scheduled to go to joint committee on December 17th and to council on January 28th. And then council will approve the document on January 28th, but enactment of the document to incorporate all of the changes that we expect that council is likely to make to the bylaw will occur probably about 6 weeks later. That would be the last administrative step. And, you know, in that last step, there isn't any discussion or anything. It's just staff bringing forward a consolidation of all the changes that council may decide to make to the draft bylaw that was released on September the 8th. So next slide, please. So these are the key messages that we've been broadcasting in all of our public open houses, both in person and virtual this fall. So this is a modernized zoning bylaw, and its objective to eliminate barriers and offer flexibility to facilitate increased housing construction, and of course also to implement policies in the official plan which support that housing construction and to manage growth as the city over the next 25 years. Key elements of the new bylaw include expanded opportunities for housing and housing options, so with broader permissions, simpler and easier to use form-based zoning citywide as opposed to by regulating by building type. I guess it is something to celebrate that the bylaw the draft bylaw has really streamlined provisions, in particular for residential zones. We've gone from 140 zones and subzones just for the residential zones down to 26. Within those 140 subzones, we have 600 separate and different standards over 117 pages of residential zone provisions. And this is a reflection of this bylaw being a consolidation of those 36 former zoning bylaws. It carried forward the former home rules from the 11 municipalities. And they did a wonderful job consolidating those rules, but we did wind up with with quite a complex bylaw when we did our best practices review of zoning in Canada and other jurisdictions in the world. When we started the new zoning bylaw project, we found that Ottawa by far in Canada had the most complex residential zone provisions, for example. So, you know, that the complexity of them, in particular over the years as they've been added to, has made them quite unwieldy. And so, you know, that's not a efficient form of regulation. So I think a big achievement as part of this bylaw is just to make it simpler and easier to understand. So we've gone from 117 pages of provisions down to about 17 for residential zones. And we hope that makes it more straightforward for residents if they want to build an addition or a deck, as well as more efficient to administer by city staff and building code services, development review, and bylaw enforcement. So yes, we have straightforward permissions for mid and high-rise development as well, to implement intensification policies in the official plan for areas in our hubs around transit stations and on main streets. We have a flexible approach to parking to reflect market needs. So there are no minimum parking requirements in this bylaw. However, there are maximum parking requirements and visitor parking requirements. Talked already about the streamlined rules, and we have removed restrictions to support economic development opportunities. And we've done that chiefly by removing arbitrary restrictions on zoning permissions for many land uses in a multitude of subzones that permitted some commercial uses, but not others. And once again, those permissions were based on the former zoning bylaws. They don't implement official plan policies, in particular the new official plan. So we've removed those restrictions on economic on permitted uses in our mixed use zones, as well in terms of economic opportunities and to support the construction of new housing, we are implementing the as of right permissions in secondary plans where we can for the development that is contemplated in those secondary plans, so that there is no longer a need for a zoning bylaw amendment for development that is permitted by those secondary plan policies. Next slide, please. So now we're moving to the part of the presentation where I'm going to talk about changes in the final draft, and we'll start with the neighborhood zones. We have gone with a general permission for 3 stories across our neighborhood zones. So in the final draft, the neighborhood zones N1, N2, and N3 have an 11-meter or 3-story height permission. Increasing the height to 11 meters makes it much easier to achieve those larger dwelling units that will house families, which is what we need to support in existing neighborhoods. Certainly in a 2-story building, it's harder to achieve those larger units with the number of bedrooms that are make it easier for to accommodate families. And so that's one of the changes in the final draft. And this slide just summarizes the evolution in building height. So in draft 1, it was 8.5 in all urban transects. In draft 2, we went to 11 meters for 3 stories in the suburban transect only, and that was to reinstate what is currently an 11-meter height limit for the most part, almost across the board in the suburban transect. It was an oversight on our part to not recognize that, so we corrected that in draft 2. And then in the final draft, we've gone to 11 meters for the N1, N2, N3. Next slide, please. Building heights have remained unchanged since draft 2 for the neighborhood N3 and N4 zones. So the N3 zone where height is 11 meters, it's 3 stories. And for H11 where heights are currently 11 meters, they've remained 11 meters. And when I say currently, I mean in the current zoning bylaw. So we've basically, in our N4 zones, carried forward the existing building heights that are permitted right now. So and you have a zone, an N4 zone, and 11 meters is currently permitted. That's been carried forward with a height suffix of H11. And then N4 zones that currently have a 4-story permission, that's been preserved and carried forward in the draft bylaw. Next slide, please. All right, so now I have a series of slides that illustrate the types of development that could happen under the new zoning bylaw. There's quite a number of slides. They illustrate for all the various transects the type of development that could be expected to happen over the next 20 years or so. So as redevelopment occurs in neighborhoods, it could occur as a wholesale demolition and reconstruction of a new building under the new zoning. So that's illustrated as number 1 and number 2. Redevelopment could also occur in neighborhoods in the form of intensification as a coach house. So someone could decide to build a coach house in their rear yard, or it could happen through additions. And here we have a rear addition shown as number 4. So we'll just run through the next. This is the inner urban transect. Next, just more examples of how redevelopment that could occur in an N4 zone now. So we have new multiplexes, we have additions, and we have coach houses. Next slide, please. We're moving to the outer urban transect. Once again, there's a range of options here that are illustrated. Coach houses, additions, and wholesale redevelopment of the lot. Next slide. Outer urban transect, now here we're showing the difference between 2 and 3 stories. So if you want to click this, we've gone to the 3-story version, and the earlier version was the 2-story, and it's just to illustrate the difference between 2 and 3 stories. Next slide, please. We're in the suburban transect, and we've got a slice of a neighborhood here, once again showing the various types of redevelopment that could occur under new zone provisions. Next slide. Suburban transect, and here we are showing 3 stories. Next slide. So now we've got some neighborhood area-wide views. So just do another click. So diagonally across the stream, that is a minor corridor. And so these are buildings developing in purple under the zoning provisions for minor corridors. Minor corridors are an intensification area under the official plan with various, building heights permitted. Here we have the urban transect with mid-rise. And then in the surrounding neighborhood, we have development, the amount of development with the turnover rates that we could expect to see happening after about 20-25 years. Next slide, please. So now we have outer urban transect, and click again. And we have a minor corridor cutting through from bottom left to upper right, and type of the building heights that are permitted under the minor corridor policies in the official plan. And then these are larger lots. So you see a fewer number of over this area of redevelopment occurring. But this is a scenario where there are various types of redevelopment occurring as total wholesale redevelopment of a lot, coach houses and additions over about 20 years. Next slide, please. So now we're in the suburban transect, and click, please. Once again, yellow is showing the redevelopment that could be expected under the new zoning bylaw to 2046. Next slide. So additional changes that were made in the final draft, we were asked to consult with GOBA and FCA on additional provisions for communal parking and more permissive permissions for communal parking lots. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of communal parking. Maybe not everyone on the committee is familiar with this, but the concept is to allow a more flexible arrangement for accommodating parking in neighborhoods. These would be new permissions for parking to be provided in neighborhood zones. In draft 1, we had more restrictive provisions and we've relaxed them somewhat. In drafts 1 and 2, we were only permitting non-accessory parking. So allowing parking from adjacent properties on another lot where people don't live on that lot. So that would be basically non-accessory parking. It would be a primary use of the land. So that's not currently permitted. And what's proposed in the draft bylaw is to relax those rules and to allow people who don't live in a planned unit development or in another neighborhood zone, zoned lot, to park on that lot. So if there's excess parking available, they would be able to park on that lot even though they don't live on that lot. So we've added some rules to that. To try and maintain the intent of the neighborhood zones, which is really to provide housing for people. But we do need to have a more flexible approach to accommodating parking in neighborhoods and to optimizing parking supply, in particular existing parking that it's underutilized and not used by residents who live on a lot. So some of the provisions that the provisions that we've added are here. So must be for another residential use within 400 meters of the property. Must be an interior lot, not a corner lot. No more than 1 drive aisle with 1 row of parking spaces on each side. 30% of the lot must be soft landscaped. It must provide an opaque screen between the parking lot and the side and rear lot lines. And we were asked to, as part of draft 2, we were directed by Joint Committee and Council to consult on a transect-based approach. So we're proposing that, communal parking not be permitted in the downtown transect or within 600 meters of a rapid transit station. So that sums up the provisions for communal parking. Next slide, please. We'll move on to transition in Main Street zones for high-rise buildings down to adjacent development in neighborhood zones on abutting lots. So neighborhood zones that abut a Main Street zone lot. So when we went to joint committee for draft 2 earlier this year, we were asked to consult on both the maximum height. So we were asked to consult on increasing the building height from 27 stories to 30 stories. We were also asked to consult on decreasing that transition distance where a high-rise, the tower portion of a high-rise building is permitted to be in terms of its distance, its setback from an abutting neighborhood zone. And so I will just go to the next slide, please, because really the best way to explain the changes that happened between draft 2 and draft 3, they're illustrated on this slide. So on the left hand of the slide, those are it illustrates the zoning provisions in draft 2. So there was a 1.5 meter setback that was required above the 4th story at the front of the lot. And then at the back of the lot. And so just to explain, this is a side view of a high-rise building on a main street and the abutting lot to the rear, which is in a neighborhood zone. So in draft 2, you couldn't go to the tower portion of a high-rise building until you were at least 30 meters setback from a neighborhood zone. And so that transition distance is illustrated here with the blue hatching. And the red hatching. The red hatching is the rear yard setback where no building is permitted. And then the blue hatching illustrates how the height of the building, the podium portion of the building, can increase as you go further away from that rear property line with a neighborhood zone. And so the height of the building in Main Street zones was capped at 27 stories. Practically speaking, you need a lot that is about 55 meters deep to accommodate the depth of the floor plate of that tower portion that's illustrated here for a high-rise building. And you can see how in the final draft we've modified the provisions. We've added an additional step back at the front of the building. So that in total, there's a 3 meter setback from the front lot line from the main street. We did this to try and increase the amount of light and sky that's going to be available to people on that street and to occupants of buildings on the other side of the street from the front of the building. And then we decreased that transition distance from 30 meters to 25 meters for where the tower portion of a high-rise building can begin. So these diagrams, they illustrate the difference between the two provisions. We can move on to the next slide, please. So for rural zones, can start off by saying, and you may remember this from earlier presentations about the new zoning bylaw, the policies in the official plan didn't change much for rural designations. And so the rural zones in the current zoning bylaw that were working for the old official plan, since those new policies haven't changed a lot, they continue to work. There is a review of village plans, village secondary plans, that is planned to start later on, this fall really, before the end of the year. And there is potential for village secondary plans to change. And if they do change, then zoning in the new zoning bylaw would change to implement those changes. But for the most part, rural zones were carried forward, pretty much unchanged. But I will just run through some of the changes that were necessary. As you know, there's been many changes from a legislative and policy perspective in Ontario with this, with the government. They've been making a lot of well-intended changes to address challenges that are faced by communities across the province. One of the changes was to support farmers. They've added an additional permission for detached dwellings in prime agricultural areas. And we use our agricultural zone in our prime agricultural areas. So that change in the provincial planning statement was made to allow one additional dwelling, detached dwelling. So we've implemented that permission in the agricultural zone. For the rural industrial and logistics zones, we had to reflect the the permitted uses that are now permitted under the definition of area of employment in the Planning Act. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the definition of area of employment in the Planning Act was changed to delete permissions for institutional and commercial uses. And of course, retail uses were never permitted. So we had to delete any permissions for institutional uses and commercial uses in our zones that we use in areas of employment that are designated in the official plan. So we do have rural and industrial logistics designations and locations around highway interchanges in the rural area where we've applied a rural industrial logistics zone, and we had to delete any institutional uses from the list of permitted uses, as well as be very careful about any retail uses that are permitted there, and office as well. Office is no longer permitted under that definition, area of employment in the Planning Act. And so any permissions for standalone office buildings had to be deleted from both our rural industrial logistics zones and our urban industrial logistics zones. Next slide, please. Other changes for rural zones, we were directed by council when they received the second draft of the zoning bylaw to implement a minimum parking rate for residential uses in villages of 1 per dwelling unit. And so that has been introduced as a new section 614 in the parking provisions. And then another change that occurred in the final draft is in relation to the mineral aggregate separation overlay, which is an overlay that is applied around our mineral aggregate zones and the mineral aggregate designation that applies in the official plan, which is implemented through those mineral aggregate zones. It's important that sensitive land uses not be located in close proximity to mineral extraction operations, because not only can they be affected by the impacts of mineral extraction operations, which are quite impactful in terms of truck traffic, noise, dust, and fly rock that can be thrown from mineral extraction areas and bedrock resource areas. But it's also important that sensitive land uses are not located in proximity to those aggregate extraction areas, because sensitive land uses can limit the licenses of mineral extraction operations. And the provincial planning statements puts a very high priority on making sure that mineral extraction can occur and not be impeded by sensitive land uses. And so it's important that official plans and zoning bylaws continue to both protect the extraction of mineral aggregates as well as create safe environments where sensitive land uses such as residential uses are permitted. So over the course of the draft zoning bylaw, those distances, those buffer depths have changed. In the current zoning bylaw, there is a buffer area where sensitive land uses may not be located around a bedrock resource area. That number was 210 meters. It was implemented through section 67 of the current zoning bylaw. And around sand and gravel resource area, there was a 150-meter buffer area. The official plan refers to a 500 and 300 area of influence around these areas. And so in drafts 1 and draft 2, we implemented a direct sort of interpretation of that area of influence. And this was a higher standard, even though the area of influence did not change from the old official plan to the new official plan. And so we received submissions saying the buffer distances in the current zoning bylaw were interpreted to implement and be in conformity with those area of influence distances in the old official plan. And since those area of influences distances did not change in the new official plan, that we should be going back to a lower separation distance. So we did return the sand and gravel resource overlay buffer back to what it was in the current zoning bylaw in section 67. We returned it to 150 meters. For bedrock resource areas, we didn't go all the way down to what it is currently. There are best practices now that a greater distance is required for the safety of sensitive land uses, because fly rock can be thrown from a bedrock resource area as far as 300 meters. There are cases where that has happened. And of course, that represents a risk to life and health. And so we've gone with a more cautious approach and increased that buffer distance to 300 meters in the final draft. Next slide, please. So additional changes to provisions in the Canada North Economic District, we revised the boundaries of some of the zoning boundaries to rationalize them so that they made more sense in terms of implementing the policies in the official plan, as well as the newly approved council approved urban design guideline framework for Canada North. So there are changes to those zone boundaries. For electrical vehicle parking space provisions in drafts 1 and 2, all parking that is provided for a residential use was required to be EV ready. And since we aren't at 100% adoption of EV vehicles right now, and since this is an entirely new requirement, we thought it was prudent to start a gradual implementation of these requirements for when EV ready parking spaces are going to be required where parking is provided. So we've reduced those EV ready parking requirements from 100% for all residential uses to 25% of parking spaces that are provided for mid and high-rise buildings. And this is a direct reference to what the official plan policies actually say, which is that the zoning bylaw will contemplate new requirements for EV-ready parking spaces for mid and high-rise buildings. And then we reduced the requirements for office and industrial uses where parking spaces are provided. The 30% requirement in drafts 1 and 2 was reduced to a 15% requirement for where parking spaces are provided. And there is a threshold. So I think I'm trying to remember what the threshold is. It's just escaped me momentarily, but I believe it's office and industrial uses that are 300 square meters and less do not have to provide those EV ready parking spaces where parking is provided. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should say that we are going to commit to monitoring EV adoption. And as that EV adoption in Ottawa increases, we will review the requirements in the zoning bylaw and modify them accordingly to increase them gradually over time. In terms of changes to the zoning app, we've made many corrections to the zoning map. So there are literally, in response to comments from, coming into our inbox and in our public open houses, we've made many corrections to the zoning map. We've also implemented new subzones to implement policies in secondary plans. Some of these subzones were already existing. They were subzones that were developed to implement particular secondary plans. So we've carried them forward, as well as made many changes to the zoning map to implement as of right permissions that are in secondary plans where we can, as far as we can as possible. And work continued on the boundaries and environmental designations. In the official plan, the boundaries of environmental designations changed. And they were literally little slivers of land along the boundaries of environmental designations throughout the city. Hundreds and hundreds of slivers of little zoning boundary changes that we've been working on for 2 years. We're continuing that work. It is very labor intensive, but we're getting very close to having that completed. And it will be, any further changes will be included in our December 17 report to Joint Committee as staff recommended changes to fully align those EP zones with those boundaries of the environmental designations, and it is purely a conformity exercise. Next slide, please. The review of exceptions and schedules. So the exceptions, if you're familiar with them, as well as the schedules, make very many detailed references to specific section and subsection and clauses in the existing zoning bylaw. Until we have the analogous provisions and section numbers nailed down, we can't do a proper alignment of all exceptions and schedules with the new zoning bylaw. And so what we are planning to do is to do a very labor intensive and as fast as we can possible review of all exceptions and schedules following approval of the new zoning bylaw to align those exceptions and schedules with the provisions in the new zoning bylaw. We have transition provisions to allow those exceptions and schedules to continue to operate as they do now until completion of that work to align exceptions and schedules with the new zoning bylaw. That work is expected to occur during 2026. If possible, we will bring a report in 2026 to council. But 2026 is an election year, and there will be a blackout period where, you know, significant reports are we're going to be limited in our ability to bring up reports beyond a certain date in 2026. But we will bring, as soon as we can with the new council, reports to bring those exceptions up to date in 2027. As part of the report that's going to joint committee, we are going to bring a work plan for that work and work rules. This is our opportunity to clean up exceptions that could be 60 years old, that no longer implement the official plan, that in many cases could be arbitrary in terms of the restrictions that they put on development. It's our opportunity to bring our zoning bylaw, which originates in zoning provisions that go back to the 1960s in a previous century, over 60 years old. It's our opportunity to do some house cleaning. When you have a regulation that applies to an entire city, it's very important that that type of house cleaning occurs to bring it up to date so that it actually functions to address the challenges facing the city now as a regulatory document and to ensure that it implements the official plan. So we may propose rules, for example, that propose to delete exceptions that originate prior to 2000 that do not implement official plan policies. And this would be a way to, you know, bring the zoning bylaw actually into this century and implement the official plan. So that will be included as a supporting document, and we'll be asking council for endorsement as part of approval of the official plan, endorsement of those work rules and of that work plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of secondary plan implementation, we are doing as much work as we can to implement those as of right permissions that are in secondary plan policies to eliminate the need for zoning bylaw amendments where it is clear that a secondary plan has policies that are permitting a certain form of development. It's not always possible to implement a secondary plan fully because many secondary plans include policies that are conditional on certain things occurring so that we can't develop zoning provisions to implement those policies as of right, because they are purposefully so in the language of those secondary plan policies intended to be implemented through site-specific zoning bylaw amendments. But we've gone as far as we can in the time available in implementing as of right clear directions in secondary plans, for example, building height where we can. As you know, our secondary plan framework is quite complex. There are over 700 pages of secondary plan policies. So it is a quite time-consuming and complex task. I would say it's advanced zoning. Both the aligning exceptions and schedules and secondary plan policies that have not been implemented in zoning where they can be implemented in zoning, but we're going as far as we can. The zoning bylaw, the draft zoning bylaw also implements recent changes to the official plan that were made through OPA 46 this summer. You may be familiar with that OPA. It was to implement strategic growth area policies in the Planning Act, rather, and MTSA directions in the Planning Act and Provincial Planning Statement to bring us up to date. with the official plan up to date. And so that OPA is actually has ministerial approval authority. So they have Ministry of Municipal Affairs has 6 months to approve that. That brings us to around the end of this year. But we've gone ahead and implemented those changes. If the ministry pulls back some of those changes that are in OPA 46, we will modify the final draft of the zoning bylaw to conform with what the ministry approves. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, this slide are about public consultation. This slide summarizes the public consultations to date. We've really gone as far as we could in the time available and the staff resources that we had. Over the course of the project, it's 24 citywide open houses, in person and virtual formats. We did breakout sessions for every ward in the city to go over the draft zoning for their ward. These statistics are current to about the beginning of September. So we've had a lot of visits to our Engage page, and I think we have about 1,500 subscribers to our Engage page. We've really tried to have a lot of information available and be as transparent as we can. Our Engage page really does have just an absolute ton of information. And with the release of this final draft, we have those illustrations that I showed you earlier to help really people to understand the type of redevelopment that can occur in neighborhoods under the new zoning bylaw in as transparent way as we can. Next slide, please. Now, the consultation period, the formal consultation for the circulation under the Planning Act for the final draft was from September the 8th to October the 3rd. We're still receiving comments, and we're absolutely reviewing them and taking them into consideration as we go forward in this last step, preparing for a joint committee. The deadline for joint committee is December the 1st, or rather the release of the report for joint committee. We're scheduling for December 1st, so there will be time for people to review that report. The report is going to include quite a few supporting documents. There are going to be staff recommended changes to the final draft of the zoning bylaw. And for the most part, I'm really happy and relieved to say they're minor changes to make corrections to both the text of the zoning map, so things that we've found in terms of drafting errors or things that have been pointed out to us in our public consultations, as well as errors in the zoning map. So once again, things that have been pointed out to us as errors in the zoning map. So for the most part, almost 100%, I mean, to this date, I don't want to say 100%, actually to date, everything that we've got in our list of staff recommended changes really do amount to correcting errors, or they are changes to properly implement what is clearly the intent of the bylaw already. So those supporting documents, there will be one for corrections to the text of the bylaw and one for corrections to the zoning map. There will be a separate document if we have a need for it, that to clearly identify where we're recommending a change of intent, because we want to have that clearly separated for councillors and the public to know where anything that's significant in terms of a change of intent is being proposed by staff. And then it'll be up to council, joint committee and council, to decide whether they want to approve those changes, whether they're corrections or a change of intent. We're scheduled to go to our statutory public meeting at joint committee on December 17th. And then about 5 or 6 weeks later, January 28th, we go to council. That's when they'll consider and the final draft. The report will be recommending approval of the final draft, plus additional recommendations concerning, endorse the work plan and work rules for reviewing exceptions and so on. And then, as I mentioned, there is an administrative process following approval on January 28th, where staff, the zoning team, will take any changes that the council deems to make to the final draft, including the staff recommended changes. And we will incorporate all of those changes into a consolidated version to reflect what council approves on January 28th. And we will bring that to a council. It will go directly to council. It would be included on as a third reading section of a council agenda. And that would be the formal enactment date of the new zoning bylaw. And then within about 10 days of that enactment date, that's when the appeal period would begin, and we would be giving notice of passing. And then there's a 20-day appeal period within which property owners and prescribed bodies can appeal the zoning bylaw. And then the appeal period begins. There is kind of a complex period of time when we were going to be having, in effect, 2 zoning bylaws in effect, and that will be after when that appeal period basically begins, following enactment. And it's at that time that, you have any development will have to be in compliance with both bylaws. So if you're going to committee of adjustment, or if you're applying for a building permit, or if you're doing some sort of a Planning Act application, you have to be in compliance with the zoning bylaw. And if you need relief from both to ensure that, you have conformity with the new zoning bylaw, the most restrictive provisions from both, because if there are appeals, and the new zoning bylaw is, a decision is issued by the Ontario Land Tribunal that, has a higher standard, we have to make sure that you're compliant with both bylaws that are in effect. So, next slide, please. And just to mention, one of the supporting documents for that December 17th report will have detailed information about transition provisions and about that sort of complex period of time when we have 2 bylaws in effect, and which bylaw, and in terms of relief from bylaws, how to go through that administratively. It will be direction for both development review staff and building code services staff, as well as enforcement staff. So this is just information. You can send comments to us still. We will look at them and review them as part of preparing those staff recommended changes for the final report. So I think we're ready for questions if anybody has questions. Or Carolyn, if you'd like some finishing comments.
No, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you very much for that presentation and guiding us through the key changes. And once again, thank you very much for all of your work, and to that of your team for getting us to this point. You must be close to relief that you've come this far. And in any case, with that, I'd just like to open it up to questions from members of the committee, or comments, or anything that Jonathan, if you want to go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Carol. The city has fairly robust canopy targets, forest canopy targets across the city. Can you just speak whether it's within the updates to the new zoning or other initiatives that the city is undertaking, to maybe move the needle forward in meeting canopy targets, tree canopy targets?
Yes, thank you for the question. So, making room for trees as redevelopment occurs has been a key direction that we've been trying to, well, it's a key direction in the official plan. It's really important for livable communities. And so we've instituted a variety of provisions to try and ensure that there is room for trees as redevelopment occurs in existing communities and as in greenfields, of course. But there are new minimum landscaping soft landscaping requirements in the rear yard. We've always had minimum soft landscaping requirements in front yards. And those kind of go hand in hand with limits on the width of driveways that are permitted, because of course anything that's left over is soft landscaping. So there are requirements now for soft landscaping in front yard and in the rear yard. There are also new provisions that are entirely new in the zoning bylaw to allow a flexible approach to building setbacks within certain parameters, within certain maximums, to allow you to situate a building further back on a lot or further forward on a lot, or to the either side of an interior side lot line, where it wouldn't otherwise be permitted, to accommodate a significant tree. So it's just built-in flexibility where you would have required a minor variance to adjust the location of the building inside what would have been a required yard. We're giving an as of right relief from that to help give some flexibility in siting the building. There are also new requirements for underground parking structures, where the type of development where underground parking structures would be required. We're basically requiring minimum areas of a yard to be set aside for soft landscaping where there are underground parking structures, because right now they're permitted to go right to the lot line. And of course, that limits the soil volume and limits the feasibility or the likelihood that a tree is going to be able to even plant it there or grow to maturity. So there are new limitations on that to try and address that issue. So yes, there are a variety of provisions that we've tried to implement. There are some of them entirely new to address the issue that you've brought about, the importance of the tree canopy for livability in neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Jonathan, did you have any follow-up or any other questions, or?
I do have other questions.
Okay.
I
Why don't you, fire
Okay,
away
proceed.
and we'll,
In a similar spirit, Carol, stormwater management requirements, right? So as intensification happens, this puts demand on infrastructure. We know the potential value of green infrastructure, some of that soft landscape. Are there additional, I know we're trying to lighten the load, if you will, from a regulation perspective, but are there moves that support integrated stormwater management in the update?
Yes, there absolutely are. So right now what we have is a regulatory gap. It's being referred to that as a regulatory gap because we can be assured that we will get stormwater management when development is subject to site plan control. But, as you're aware, the Planning Act has changed, and now 10 dwelling units and less are no longer subject to site plan control. And so there's no way to get stormwater management right now for development that is 10 units and less. So it was really important that the zoning bylaw
12 units and less as of last week.
12 units and less for Ottawa. Yes. So it's the new zoning bylaw has for the first time imposed requirements for stormwater management, and those requirements will kick in for 12 units or less, where site plan control is not required. And so, you spoke of lids, and lids could certainly form part of the stormwater management that will be required for infill development at that scale. And it will be implemented through the building permit process, since it is a requirement in the zoning bylaw. And we are working with infrastructure master plan staff who have been consulted on requirements for stormwater management within infill development through the official plan consultation process and the infrastructure master plan work that has been underway. And so there has been extensive consultation with the industry on these requirements, and a supporting document that will be included in our December 17th report will have detailed information and resources that will be available to support these new requirements for stormwater management when the new zoning bylaw comes into effect. So, stormwater management is one of those bread and butter things in planning that absolutely must be looked after, because we get flooding in neighborhoods, flooding of basements as infill development occurs. And actually there certainly is potential as infill development occurs for the flood risk in neighborhood to actually be reduced as infill occurs, because there will be stormwater management, better stormwater management with the infill development than there is on the lot currently. So there is actually the potential to actually, reduce runoff into our systems through the stormwater management requirements. So all in all, it's really a really good and important thing. It's good planning, and it's going to increase resiliency of neighborhoods to flooding and over the years as it occurs on a site-by-site basis.
Great, thanks. I have one last question. It's on regarding parking. You'd mentioned communal parking. As part of this review or embedded within it, is there consideration any changes on the city side to on-street parking?
Yes, you bring up a really good point. And what I do have funds in my account for the new zoning bylaw, and we are working on getting an on-street parking permit program study underway for citywide. And really, it's a really good point. It's something that's needed to help manage parking demand and parking supply in neighborhoods as the city matures and we start to see more intensification in neighborhoods. So yes, you've identified something that's a big need, and it's being contemplated, and there are funds available for that work to begin.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Carol. Member Sun, did you have some questions?
Yes, I do have a few questions. The first one, at the last 2 pages, you mentioned about there's a period of time 2 zoning bylaw will be in place. I'm just wondering, can the city release this data to public now? Because I know that the owner public holding their development plan to want use new zoning bylaw. So because we already have the estimate date, so can we post this date on the Engage Ottawa so public can aware and prepare their proposal?
Okay, you mean the dates when enactment is expected and so on, like in the slide that
Yes,
I
yes.
showed
So
you?
at least
Yeah.
give the date like April or March 2026.
Yeah.
So people can apply submit their application according to the zoning bylaw. So
Yeah, it's a good point. We can certainly include information about enactment. We can add it to our timelines. And, we need to, it's very complicated when new zoning bylaws come into effect. There's a transition period, and appeals can hold up the implementation of the new zoning bylaw, sort of basically render the provisions, not in effect because they may be more permissive. And while you have something under appeal, the more restrictive provisions from the current zoning bylaw will override those more permissive provisions. So there's going to be a period of time where we're resolving appeals, that there's potential for provisions in the new zoning bylaw to not come into effect fully right away, but we will have information, a document that explains what's in effect, what's under appeal, and, to help people to understand what zoning actually applies to their property. So thank you for the suggestion. And Tim Rowe is here with us on the call. Tim is the project manager for the new zoning bylaw, and he looks after our Engage page, and we will take your suggestion and do that.
Thank you. My second question is, the city have a lot of the road widening. So I'm just wondering, either GeoMap or somehow we can integrate this information to not the zoning bylaw, but the GeoMap. Because a lot of time we found zoning bylaw doesn't mention about the road widening, and GeoMap doesn't show the road widening information. So is there any way so the public can see the road widening in some format?
Okay, yeah. So those, as you know, I'm sure the description of the road, the planned width of roads, the right of way is in the official plan in text in a long table. It's never been mapped. And I will take your suggestion away to the official plan team to see if there's potential for them to take up that task and actually map the planned, document that's included in the official plan. explains in words. So I'll take that one away.
Yeah, really appreciate it. My last question is regarding the if application, the severance application or minor variance application approved this year, but actual building permit application or site planning will take place in next year under new zoning bylaw. So is there any transition or guideline how to release some condition under current approval, COE approval?
So what happens when a new zoning bylaw comes into effect is the old one is repealed and it goes away. So without transition provisions, those permissions, those minor variances, for instance, that someone obtained at committee, say on November the 4th, would die with the bylaw. But our transition provisions extend those. So in effect, they keep those minor variances alive. And so if you obtain, there's two types of transition provisions. There's transition provisions for complete applications to the Committee of Adjustment, for example. And then there's transition provisions for approvals from the Committee of Adjustment that are obtained prior to the new zoning bylaw coming into effect. And the transition provisions for completed applications for a minor variance, where you've obtained your variance, for example, you get 3 years to get your building permit under those minor variances. So it extends the life of the minor variance for 3 years. If you have an in-process application at the Committee of Adjustment, say you go to the committee a week before January 28th, then you have 5 years to get your building permit. So the transition provisions kind of extend the life and allow an orderly transition between the two bylaws so that, you know, if you've gone through a Planning Act process like a minor variance or a zoning bylaw amendment, it gives you some time to get your building permit.
So can we provide this guideline instruction to the public? So I am
Yes.
a designer, architect. I'm already confused. So
Okay,
assuming
the transition provisions
public
are,
will be the further confused.
yes,
I read
that
this.
will be in a supporting document in
Okay,
the
thank
December
you.
17th report. And we did include a similar document in our draft 2 report. But you're right, it is very, it is complex to understand. But the principle is, if you've applied for, you know, a minor variance, for example, now, you don't have to worry about it going away when the new zoning bylaw comes into effect. You've got 3 or 5 years to get your building permit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions from other members? Jason, I'll go to you first and then Councillor Leeper.
If the councillor has kind of a zoning question, okay, he's going to defer to me. All right, Carol, thanks so very much for that. I just want to triple check in case I missed it, but the N1, N2 will still have the 4 units per lot, right? As of right.
Absolutely.
We talked
yeah.
about stories and heights, but not
That's right.
the units part.
Nothing changed. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. The other question I have is I want to tie the zoning to the housing targets and the growth management strategy. So these might not be questions you might not be able to answer right this moment, but I just want to kind of think about the growth management strategy, right? Says like 90,000, half of our 195,000 unit housing target is intensification, half of which again, you know, split it in half again, about 45,000 in existing neighborhoods, 45,000 units around LRT stations or in hubs rather. And I just want to kind of make the connection between those two things and say, you know, have you guys done kind of the calculations to say, yes, we've given enough zoning permissions in neighborhoods and in hubs in terms of heights that we have a reasonable opportunity to achieve the housing targets we've set out for ourselves. And I know there was a GMS implementation document way back with the OP where you kind of referenced the ratio of the assumption that it's like 1% of turnover in a neighborhood every year kind of thing to, you know, with the cumulative impact. Have you guys looked at, the totality of the zoning and again, have we given ourselves enough opportunity to achieve the targets we've set out?
Yes, we have. So So modeling something that is very difficult because there's no way, well, first of all, there's no way to predict what neighborhood's going to be hot,
For sure.
and then it's so, and there's no way to predict if someone's going to max out the number of units every time, or if there's going to be a severance, or if they're just going to demolish and build one more large house,
Yep.
So, I mean, there are so many variables there at play, but certainly there is adequate potential there with the draft, what's proposed to achieve those numbers.
Okay.
And you know very well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I know.
Better than I,
Yeah,
like,
no.
oh, there could be another pandemic, God forbid, or things like that, that could impact the feasibility of development, or the willingness of people to sell or to even to buy. So yes, there's so many things at play, but certainly in terms of the potential that we provide with the new zoning bylaw, yes,
Yep.
we can. Yes.
And then my kind of second half of that is, as Royce is kind of over on this side of the table doing an update to the growth projections.
Yes.
And if assume we, the Ministry of Finance numbers was like 280,000 more people, if it's roughly, if that translates into, say, another 100,000 homes that we have to accommodate over up to 2051, and the ratio stays the same on intensification, so we're adding, say, another 50,000 homes on the intensification side, do we figure we have enough potential to accommodate that intensification growth? Then not even increasing the actual ratio, just keeping the ratios the same, and just the scale of the number is bigger.
Yeah, I don't want to go on a limb and answer that
and
one.
And I appreciate, and that's why I said, like, you might not be able to answer this one tonight, but I just want to kind of tie our housing targets and to what we're doing to zoning, just to make sure that we're kind of covering ourselves.
Absolutely, it's a really good point, and it's the work we need to do to confirm. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. And so to end on a really good note, again, thank you guys and all your staff for each a lot of this work, a lot of consultation with industry. I think say each step, each draft that has come out has actually, there's little progressive elements on each one, and each one has kind of improved each time, right up to the third draft that's come out. So kudos on that work.
Oh, thank you. They've been really, like, the team is really listening. Yeah, they're really listening and trying to be, I would say, reasonable and balance interests, but yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Councillor Leeper, if you'll just indulge me, if I can just insert a question in, because it's just a follow on to Jason's, and then I'll come back to you, if that's okay. Thanks. So just picking up on this idea of the using sort of the average of the 1% annual turnover rate. You showed a number of maps in your presentation, Carol, of sort of what neighborhoods could look like and different transects and that sort of thing, to give an idea of potentially how the zoning could the result of the zoning.
It's not a prediction, it's just
a
scenario. Yes,
it's just just this is a possibility. So lots of factors involved, that sort of thing. I think one of the continuing, I'll say, concerns is that while that 1%, and I understand that comes from sort of a historical average across the city, that while that is maybe quite true, and I don't doubt it, that obviously it's quite different for different neighborhoods.
It's like the weather. It's like a heat map. Yeah, it's going to change. So to project a consistent number is not realistic, but we had to pick a number. So yeah.
Yeah. But I guess my point is that looking ahead, that I think what is needed, it seems to me, that we need to be looking at where those hotspots develop. I mean, we know the hotspots now, at least we should know. We have an idea. We have the data to support that knowledge of where the hotspots are in the city now. Parts of Councillor Leeper's ward are certainly part of one of those hotspots of development and intensification. But it seems to me that we are going to want to monitor where those hotspots develop, where the 1% is nothing, where it turns out we're nothing close to 1%.
Yeah,
where we need to possibly do more to encourage, where we really continue to get little or no development. but also where those hotspots emerge. And not because I'm advocating that we should, stamp them out, like we need the housing. So I'm not here to say let's curb that, but it's about making sure that we have the social and physical infrastructure and amenities to serve those communities. And I think one of the concerns is that there's a siloed sort of effect of, we've got the zoning. It's a really important tool, obviously, to promote housing and intensification, all those things we need to do in the city. But that there's no obvious or clear mechanism to connect the dots with the other needs of how we get to being a livable city. So this also falls into the category of questions or comments that you can't address tonight. But I just wanted to make sure, I'll say once again, because it's not the first time I've raised it, that I think the city really needs to address that, because I think we are hearing as the city comes under more financial pressure as well, about the needs of those social and physical supports in communities that communities that are already feeling under pressure are feeling, and that's only going to increase. So I think the better we have, the more data that we have to really understand that, and to make those adjustments, I think that's going to be really important going forward. So I guess the ask would be to develop a methodology of that the city could do that regular monitoring, and to make it publicly accessible, and accessible to councillors, so they have a clear understanding. We have some facts on the ground, as it were, to where the real needs lie in terms of supporting growth.
Yeah,
Can I just respond to that, Carol, maybe? And it's an interesting question. I agree with you with the hotspots and the implications, and I think we are getting better at that. I mean, to me, zoning isn't going to drive that, but it is the enabler that then you need to make sure you have all these other things in place, and aligning this up and getting our zoning up to date. Like, we now have a transportation master plan, and we're not going to come back in 4 years and start all over. We're going to look at it, annually in terms of how is that panning out with where we're seeing the development. And that may cause us to want to shift the order of some things. If we see like a big hotspot blowing up and that was really 15 years out on a plan, maybe we need to rejig the sequencing of things. And we have that conversation. I think the infrastructure master plan is another one. The parks plan is one of the commitments that was in the acceleration housing plan from last week. So that'll come forward in terms of a conversation on that, and how we evaluate sort of that need and what is our way of moving forward. That's supposed to come to council in Q1 of 26. And then I think it was mentioned earlier, the work around the tree canopy. We're doing a lot more analysis, for example, of where we are, where the desert neighborhoods. And so I think, what this conversation is making me think about is, how do we better integrate those master planning exercises into a coherent picture for the community to then kind of, take the pulse, like, how livable is this? And I could add public realm and like other kinds of layers to this, but interesting thought. And I think that we're getting better at the master planning pieces. Now we got to start to figure out how that comes together, especially as the city builds out. So really good conversation, and I'll certainly take that back with my colleagues.
Yeah, no, that's terrific to hear. And I think it is that, we've got some really solid pieces. We need to make sure that they're hanging together and actually mutually supportive and internally consistent, and all of those things. So yeah, thank you. Okay, I will go to Councillor Leeper, unless, Jason, you have a follow-up to the follow-up, which I'm anticipating.
Sorry, Councillor. All I want to say is, don't quote me on the 1%. It's around that. I don't have the number in front of me. Just don't take that as gospel. It's something like that, but it's a rule of thumb.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Leeper, jump in, please.
No, a very small question. I think I was expecting, coming out of last week's Housing Acceleration Task Force recommendations, a staff-initiated rezoning on the height to accommodate modular buildings.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear that in your list of staff-initiated amendments. Is that still forthcoming?
Yes, it is. It will absolutely be in the report. It
So for
is
the
written
benefit of
up in the report. Yeah.
the committee members who may not have followed that really closely, I'm expecting to see that the height limit where it's currently proposed at 11 meters for some of the zones would be proposed at 12 meters for some of the zones.
Yeah, we'd have to go to 12.5 to accommodate
Okay.
that double floor.
Yeah,
That's
and
between, yeah.
I don't think council is going to push back at that. It makes total sense. But we might just want to make sure that the public is aware of that a little sooner.
Council,
Is
this
there
conversation is making me think we have to put that in that third bucket of document where we talk about things that change the intent. It's not a huge, like we always thought we weren't creating a barrier for modular, but then we found out we were. But it is a very purposeful change to enable modular. So I think calling that out in that context of changes so it doesn't get sort of bundled in the administrative corrections is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think some neighborhoods are going to go from 8.5 to 11 and now 12.5. And so it will be at least somewhat contentious in some parts of the city. And even where I have 11-meter height limits in my ward, people are going to grumble at the additional 1.5 meters, although I don't think it will make a big difference to the experience of their neighborhoods. So just want to make sure that's still moving forward and that we have a plan to make sure that it doesn't kind of get under the rug.
No,
Thank you.
we're stashing these things away like squirrels, you know, with our nuts. Yeah. So that
Amazing.
one's in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Is there any rationale to conditioning that additional height to modular builds?
Oh, it would just be that additional height would be, or for developing or we've written language, it's for modular buildings with double floor construction.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because some modular construction is, complies with the building height, like it's designed to comply.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a particular construction method that has a double floor, that's their model, and they need some extra height.
Yeah, got it.
Sorry if is that supported by legal?
I'm working, bylaw interpretation staff are writing the qualifying language about double floor, but what concern did you have?
I just I know I'd had one conversation with legal who didn't consider at one point that it was possible to allow only for modular or for a separate height limit for modular. Because when you think about what zoning does, I don't care whether the house next to me is modular or not. What I care about is how tall it is. And so I'm just wondering whether we can legally create a zoning class, for want of a better word, for just modular. So I don't have a strong opinion on that. I'm just interested to hear whether or not that's something we can actually do.
I think it was the difficulty in writing it to be specific enough that might have been a concern, but I'll check with legal because I hadn't heard that there was an actual, concern about it not being.
It might also be framed more like an exception. So this is the requirement, but if you have a constructability issue, then it's an exception, similar to the way you might have an exception to allow the top of a place of worship, for example.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Interesting. Okay, any other questions from other members? No, okay. I had just a couple of things. I just wanted to circle back just for some clarification regarding trees and supporting tree canopy. And it was about soil volumes. And I guess, Carol, can you just speak to I think the changes that were made to soil volume requirements? Because I think there's a concern that while you had discussed the flexibility that has been introduced, which I think is terrific, about siting buildings to accommodate trees and giving some much greater flexibility there. That's terrific. But I think there's some concern about that if we're not actually providing trees with soil volume, and not soil volume that's spread across a large area, but actually could support a tree, then if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? So maybe if you could just clarify as a first point.
So we're looking at those provisions right now in terms of actually what's possible from an implementation perspective and an enforcement perspective. Because if you require a soil volume, that means that you're going to have to require a minimum depth. And that means someone's going to have to be there to inspect it. And that's, practically speaking, quite difficult. I think what we are probably going to land on is a surface area requirement. And just because of we've already received been put on notice that we will be challenged on that provision from a legal perspective in terms of it being ultra vires, that we can't do it. Other municipalities have tried to do a soil volume and been challenged on it. So I was just speaking to Robert about it. There is potential. I'm just looking for the provisions now because I'm trying to remember exactly how they're written. But there certainly is going to be a surface area requirement, and there's certain requirements that it can't just be like a spaghetti strip at the back. So to regulate it's basically it's proportions. So yeah, I'm not sure I've given you enough detail, and I'm looking for the provisions right now. Sorry to refer to them exactly to see what they say, but I can say that soil volume has been contentious just because we've been challenged from a legal perspective.
Okay.
And we've been told by enforcement and our own foresters, they want it, but they understand that it, from a building code perspective and an inspection perspective, it's difficult. For a number of reasons. There's shallow soils. There's people, who can't have basements even because they've got bedrock, a foot below and so on. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's leave that one for now. The other question that I had was actually about the EV requirements, and I think there were changes. I'll say weakened EV readiness requirements for new parking. And I think the thinking is that will have, and I know you talked about, well, we're obviously not in a scenario currently where everyone's driving electric vehicles. But this is a 25-year plan. This is to set the stage for, buildings going forward over the next few decades. And I think the concern is that we'll be facing pretty costly energy retrofit consequences if we don't require those now. And we won't be helping ourselves as far as our OP carbon reduction targets go if we weaken those EV requirements. So I'm just wondering why the change to that.
All right, so we've calibrated the minimum requirements to what we expect EV ownership will be in 5 years. And then we've committed to monitoring over that period of time what EV uptake is in Ottawa. When you institute a new regulation entirely, if you go from 0 to 100 miles an hour all at once, there's a big adjustment there. I think what we've done is we've focused on the most expensive built form to retrofit, which is mid and high-rise concrete construction, and instituted minimum requirements now. For low-rise development, it's in particular where there's a garage, like in Greenfields. I mean, it's not a big deal they are already. I mean, Jason can speak to this probably better than I can with more definitiveness, but our understanding is that they're already going to be wired to accommodate EV charging, that they're doing that now as of right, for new builds where there's a garage. And so I think we're just trying to, given all of the other pressures, which another member of the committee mentioned in terms of costs for housing and, the friction that's being experienced and the impacts on the industry and the trouble that we're having getting up to the number of dwelling units that we need, we just thought, okay, well, we're still going to have a requirement, but we're going to institute this gradually. We're going to set our target for what we think EV uptake will be in, in 5 years and go from there. So, I mean, no, it's not 100% anymore, but I do think that 100% was a bit much. Not myself,
Yeah.
especially when you're instituting a new regulation from nothing. So,
Yeah. And there, and as you said, there'll be a review in 5 years' time.
yeah, we'll keep our
Yeah.
eye on it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that EV ownership is up, and continues at that pace.
Okay. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. Well, in that case, I will thank you very much again for the presentation, for answering the questions that were had, and thank you everyone for the discussion. Is the presentation received by this committee? I'll just assuming yes, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Received. And are there any notices of motion for consideration at our next meeting? Okay, hearing none. Are there any formal written inquiries? I'm going to assume not, but I will ask the question. And any other business? Okay, that's terrific. We are just after 7 o'clock, and I think we are adjourned. So thank you very much again, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you again to staff for your presentation and your time this evening. The next meeting date is not set yet, but members will be advised when that information is available. So thank you once again, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, everyone.